Picture this. You're right in the heart of the blistering Syrian desert, and suddenly, rising from an oasis surrounded by endless sands, is a city unlike literally any other. We're talking about a massive crossroads of civilizations, a place where merchants, emperors, and rebel queens completely shaped the destiny of the ancient Near East. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into the epic story of Palmyra, also known as Tadmur, or the Bride of the Desert. It's this legendary oasis that somehow rose from a desolate wasteland to entirely shake up the ancient world. So how exactly does a remote desert oasis become the greatest rival to the mighty Roman Empire? It's an incredible question, right? I mean, when we look at the ruins of this magnificent city, a place that receives less than 6 inches of rain a year, mind you, we really have to ask ourselves, how did a scorching wasteland become one of the wealthiest commercial centers in the world? To figure that out, we first have to understand how a civilization even manages to survive, let alone build a thriving metropolis in such an unforgiving environment.
Well, it all starts with one incredibly fragile lifeline: water. First settled by Amorite nomads way back around the 18th century BCE, the remote site of Tadmor relied completely on these crucial, naturally occurring sulfurous springs for its very survival. The geography of the Syrian desert is harsh. You've got these dry, bare mountains to the north and west cutting off the Mediterranean coast, and just vast, flat deserts stretching to the east and south. Those natural springs were literally the only reason human habitation was even possible here.
And when we zoom out to place Palmyra within the broader narrative of ancient engineering, it's fascinating to compare it to other desert societies in the region. You've got a whole spectrum of human ingenuity going on. Over in Petra, the Nabateans were carving these massive rock-cut cisterns and diverting flash floods. Down in ancient Yemen, they engineered enormous spate irrigation systems and the famous Marib Dam. But Palmyra, they carved their own unique path by meticulously managing and adapting to their vital oasis springs.
To put that into perspective, hydrogeological data from the region tracks the massive scale of water management that sustained desert civilizations, like those in ancient Yemen, right up until the catastrophic collapse of their Great Dam. You can think of water management like the power grid of the ancient world. If your water infrastructure failed, your civilization collapsed. Full stop. Palmyra's careful, meticulous stewardship of its oasis was the absolute foundational bedrock of its future empire.
Okay, so with their survival secured by the oasis, Palmyra capitalized on its strategic location to become the ultimate middleman. The 2nd century Roman historian Appian hit the nail on the head. He noted that the Palmyrene basically brought products from India, Arabia, and Persia, and then disposed of them in Roman territory. They positioned themselves perfectly right between the Roman Empire to the west and the Parthian and later the Sasanian empires to the east. They profited enormously by offering a neutral, highly lucrative alternative to the standard trade routes. While Rome heavily controlled the Red Sea and Alexandria routes, Palmyra cleverly channeled the Silk Road trade. We're talking about massive shipments of luxuries, silks, and spices from India and China, moving up through the Persian Gulf, along the Euphrates, and right across the Syro-Arabian desert. Because they were this semi-independent neutral town, they became the vital, highly taxed bottleneck connecting east and west. But let's be real, crossing the desert back then was incredibly dangerous. These were high-risk, high-reward caravan ventures, and they were spearheaded by what the Greeks called a synodiarch, basically the chief of a caravan. Think of them as the venture capitalists and private military contractors of the ancient world rolled into one. These were elite, Bedouin-connected figures who protected the trade from desert tribes and rival threats. They were protectors, diplomats, and entrepreneurs who funded massive expeditions and literally policed the desert. And the vast wealth generated from this monopoly on desert trade, well, it funded some staggering monumental architecture. Imagine walking down the Great Colonnade. It was this majestic avenue made of pale gold limestone stretching over a kilometer long, originally featuring some 375 towering Corinthian columns. Built in 3 separate sections over the 2nd and 3rd centuries, it was a brilliant display of urban planning that tied the city's major temples, theaters, and gates all together. Just off that colonnade was the Agora, the central public meeting place. And what's super interesting here is how the columns featured these special projecting brackets that held bronze statues honoring the city's elite. You had senators on the east side, officials on the north, soldiers on the west, and, crucially, the caravan leaders on the south. This shows us exactly who held the real power in Palmyra. The commercial and civic elites were completely, undeniably intertwined. But the absolute pinnacle of their wealth had to be the Temple of Bel. Now, this wasn't built overnight, not even close.
It was a massive, ongoing construction project funded by donations from wealthy Palmyrians that took over a century and a half to finalize. Construction kicked off in 19 CE, the temple was consecrated in 32 CE, the vast courtyard was later added under Roman Emperor Hadrian, and the monumental entrance finally opened its doors in 175 CE. 4 hectares. Let that sink in for a second. That is the massive footprint of the Temple of Bel's courtyard. It was an architectural marvel that perfectly, physically embodied Palmyra's role as a cultural bridge. It beautifully blended Greco-Roman styling, like the classic rectangular colonnades, with deep local Near Eastern traditions, featuring crow-stepped merlins on the roof and these high interior niches meant for the gods. So the really crucial takeaway here is that this monumental city wasn't just a commercial melting pot, it was a spiritual one too. The pantheon of Palmyra was incredibly diverse. You had Canaanite gods like Baal-Shemin, Babylonian deities like Bel and Ishtar, Greek gods like Zeus, and local Arab gods like Yarhibal and Aglabal. All these belief systems just converged right there in the desert oasis, creating a uniquely complex religious life. Archaeological evidence and ancient inscriptions show us that the Palmyrans masterfully blended these cultures together through religious syncretism. They equated local and Eastern gods with Greek counterparts. So Bel and Baal-Shemin were identified with the Greek Zeus. The solar gods Yargibal and Malakbel are associated with Helios or the Iranian Mithras, and the goddess Alat was identified with Athena. Historical sources even point to Jewish Sadducean influences flowing in from the trade routes. It was just an unparalleled environment of intercultural dialogue. And this rich cultural syncretism extended right down to how they treated their dead. The elites of Palmyra were buried in what they called the House of Eternity. These were distinctively Arabic, lofty tower tombs and house-like chambers situated up on the hills overlooking the city. Inside, they were adorned with highly ornate, beautifully sculpted limestone portraits of the deceased. It was their way of eternally preserving the faces of the merchants and priests who actually built the city. Ultimately, Palmyra's power peaked during the dramatic crisis of the 3rd century. Leaders like Odaenathus valiantly defended the east against the Sasanian Empire, but it was his widow whose name truly became legend. While later Romantic myths can sometimes obscure the truth, contemporary historical and epigraphic sources absolutely confirm that Queen Zenobia transformed Palmyra from a wealthy trading hub into a full-blown independent empire. She boldly expanded into Egypt and Anatolia, directly challenging the Roman Emperor Aurelian before Rome ultimately reclaimed the city in 272 CE. Now let's fast forward to the modern era to witness a really tragic turning point in this ancient city's story. In May 2015, the Syrian civil war brought devastation straight to the gates of Tadmur. A rapid military offensive by the Islamic State, or ISIS, began on May 14th. By May 20th, both the ancient ruins and the modern city were completely overrun. This led to a grim, dark period where the city was subjected to violent purges and public executions. What followed was an irreplaceable loss for global heritage. By August 2015, the world watched in horror as ISIS deliberately destroyed significant portions of Palmyra's globally recognized architectural monuments. The magnificent Temple of Bel, which, remember, had stood for nearly 2 millennia as this incredible testament to human synthesis and cooperation, was tragically blown up and reduced to rubble. Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway of this explainer. Empires have risen and fallen all around it. Time, war, and nature have deeply scarred its monuments. But the enduring legacy of Palmyra as a vital bridge between civilizations remains unbroken. As international conservation efforts look to the future, we are left with a profound question to think about. What will the remaining stones of Tadmur teach future generations about humanity's enduring, yet fragile ability to unite East and West?